Hi, I'll continue on with paragraph 34 of the chapter on Trills in Carl Philipp Emanuel Bach's Versuch über die wahre Art, das Klavier zu spielen. Dieser Pralltriller kann nicht anders als vor einer fallenden Sekunde vorkommen. Sie mag nun durch einen Vorschlag oder eine große Note entstehen. Figur 47. Man findet ihn über kurzen Noten A oder solchen, welche durch einen Vorschlag kurz werden B. Deswegen, wenn auch über vermehrenden Noten vorzukommen pflegt, so hält man den Vorschlag ganz lang und schnappt hernach ganz kurz mit diesem Triller ab, indem man den Finger von der Taste entfernt. C. Okay, so there are things in this paragraph that will be useful to you as an interpreter, useful to identifying the Prall trill, and there's hints there at, Bach's style and what have you, which I'll go into. But as well, I want to look at what Bärenreiter say in the introduction regarding this paragraph. There'll be a few uses doing so. One, it'll support what I had said earlier about the way Lilliput gets everything 180 degrees wrong. So this will be an instance of that to show that when I say such things, I'm not just saying them, that there's reasons behind it. They're the result of observations. And so this will serve that purpose, that this is an example where Lilliput gets it 180 degrees wrong. By looking at it, you'll have more to remember about, because we're looking at Bach. We're taking in order to go through what Lilliput say, we will be taking a closer look at what Bach says, and we'll be better understanding how Bach understands what he says. So it'll have that benefit too. Yeah, and there'll be other benefits too that I can't quite think of in this exact moment, but it's a worthwhile endeavor. As little fun as it is for me to look at Lilliput, I think it, yeah, and you'll be able to, I'll present, I'll read now what Lilliput say, what Bärenreiter say about this paragraph, and specifically the first sentence of that paragraph. So the first sentence is: Dieser Pralltriller kann nicht anders als vor einer fallenden Sekunde vorkommen. Sie mag nun durch einen Vorschlag oder eine große Note entstehen. Okay, so that sentence is what they're referring to. I'll read now what Bärenreiter say, and then I'll go through and you can decide, you can draw your own conclusions. and if I'm influencing your decision, just ignore that. You can just kind of keep the facts or what's there in your mind, and forget about anything I might add. Okay, so I'll read what Bärenreiter say. Bach konnte mit Recht stolz darauf sein, dass sowohl der Text als auch die Noten in seinen beiden Versuchen nahezu fehlerfrei waren. Okay, that's the first sentence, and I mean, this will be difficult for me without getting worked up generally, but this is a typical, you know, this way of talking is you'll encounter this often in Lilliput, and it's a similar way of talking as addition shot. The way I said, you know, they'll say from the fact or naturally or whatever. Whenever they're saying anything they say, they always put it like it's out of question, and they put themselves like they're superior. You know, they stand above Bach. And here as well, they're, you know, standing, it's condescending. You know, you can imagine it's like they're saying, Bärenreiter are saying we're in a position to correct Bach's work. And Bach could hand it up, his Versuch über die wahre Art, das Klavier zu spielen. He could hand that to those people in Bärenreiter who are behind this this introduction, because in the introduction they say, it says we, so there's more of them. They all put their heads together to make this introduction. And it's like they're in a position to correct Bach's text and then hand it back and say to Bach, well done, it was practically free from mistakes. You can be proud of yourself. So so you can usually expect, when you hear something like that, you can usually expect some stroke of genius to come out of them afterwards. And here's theirs. So they stand above Bach and they say, well done, Bach, you can be proud of yourself. It was practically free from mistakes only, but here's a little thing you could work on to improve yourself. So they say, and it's very generous of them, because they say, lediglich eine Stelle ist uns aufgefallen, die inhaltlich problematisch ist. So there was just this spot, Bach. Otherwise you can be proud of yourself. It was practically free from mistake. But we know we are in a position to correct what you do. Yeah, it'll get to substance now. I mean, yeah, it works me up. So there was a passage, a spot they noticed that was problematic regarding its contents. And this is this sentence in paragraph 34 that I just read. So they say, den Pralltriller lokalisiert Bach zunächst vor einer fallenden Sekunde. And then they have in brackets 1753, page 83, paragraph 34, which is that paragraph. And then they say the wording in all editions is the same. And then that's close brackets. And so they say, in Wahrheit sitzt aber auf der zweiten Note, mithin nach einer fallenden Sekunde. And then they say to compare, in brackets they say compare, then in this sense compare Bach's formulations, and then they list 3 examples. And then they say, deshalb sollte man auch an der ersten Stelle nachlesen. So they say in paragraph 34, Bach, localizes the Pralltrill vor einer fallende Sekunde, and vor in German means before and nach means after. So vor is before and nach is after. So they say, Bach says, you'll find the Pralltrill will occur before a descending second or a falling second. And then they say, but in reality, in truth, it's sitting on the second note. So if you look at, let's say, the example 47A and the first part of that example, you can see the Pralltrill over the F, the sign for the trill over the F. And so Bärenreiter, they noticed that the Prall trill, that it's on the second note. And with that, it's coming after a descending second. Therefore, one should read, when Bach says before ascending second, vor einer fallenden Sekunde, one should read nach einer fallenden Sekunde. So one should scribble out the word for in that sentence and write in the word nach. So that was Bärenreiter's conclusion. Because they say in reality, the descending second is the first note. And then the Prall trill comes after the first note in that example. So there's a few things there to look at. So apparently, even though Bach was almost free from mistake, Bärenreiter is saying to him, correct that bit and it'll be much better. They've corrected it and they've come up with suggestions of how to correct it. So first of all, they say that the fallende Sekunde is the first note, because they say, Bach says it sits before a fallende Sekunde, but however, in reality, it's the trill sign is on the second note. So nach. So Bärenreiter say in reality, that G, if one is to take that example, is the fallende Sekunde. So if that is the case, if that is the reality, it should be impossible for me to determine that when Bach says the fallende Sekunde, that he means the second note and not the first note. That should be impossible, because after all, Bärenreiter say in reality, in truth. So I can't establish something that doesn't exist. And if it doesn't exist in reality, it doesn't exist at all. So I won't be able to establish that the descending second is the second note and not the first note. So prepare for the impossible. So I look at paragraph 13. And Bach is talking about here in this paragraph, I've gone through it in a previous video. He's talking about the Nachschlag of the trill. And he's saying when and when not a Nachschlag can be played. And so he says, wenn die Noten kurz sind, so leidet ihn eine drauffolgende steigende Sekunde allezeit eher B als eine fallende. So, he's talking about figure 27B and C, those figures. And so, there you can see the first example B. And he said, so when the note is short like that C, it rather suffers a directly ensuing steigende Sekunde, or ascending second, or climbing second, whatever you call it. So there's the note, the short note with the trill on it. And he's talking about the Nachschlag. So the Nachschlag of that trill, which will come at the end of the trill, rather prefers a directly ensuing ascending second. So if I was to ask you, what is directly ensuing after that trill with the Nachschlag over the C, what would you answer? Would you say the D directly ensues? And if you did answer that, I would say yes, that's what I'd say too. The D directly ensues. And what is that directly ensuing D called? What does Bach call it? He calls it a steigende Sekunde, or an ascending second. So you have the C, which will have a Nachschlag because it rather suits an ascending second, a directly ensuing ascending second, than a descending second. So that D, we can establish that D, that Bach understands that D, the note after the C, as being a steigende Sekunde, or an ascending second. And then you see the example C. And so with the example C, he's saying the trill, the Nachschlag doesn't like a directly ensuing descending second as much. So, and he says eine drauffolgende fallende Sekunde. So, what note does Bach mean when he says eine drauffolgende fallende Sekunde? A directly ensuing fallende Sekunde. What note is that? What is directly ensuing that C with the trill over it? The answer to that is the B. That directly ensues. And what does Bach call that B? He calls it a fallende Sekunde. And if you look at, take then the example D of that figure 27, Bach says, da bei ganz langsamer Zeitmaß folgende Arten Noten D einen Nachschlag vertragen, ungeachtet die geschwinde Folge nach den Punkten die Stelle eines Nachschlags vertreten könnte, so sieht man hieraus, dass bloß eine fallende Sekunde diesem Nachschlage am meisten zuwider ist. So, what Bach is saying there, you see the example D, there's three beats in that bar, let's say. And there's two options. If you don't count the note itself being repeated, there's two options where the melody or the line can go following the note. And the two options is it can either move in step or it can leap. And for each of those two options, there's two variations. Moving in step and leaping, they can both either, the leap can be ascending, it can be leaping upwards or it can be leaping downwards. And in terms of stepwise motion, it can be ascending, it can take a step up or a step down. So if you take away the idea of the note repeating itself, the note being repeated, those are the only options that you have that can follow a note. Either it moves, it ascends or descends in stepwise motion, or it leaps. And that covers every possible note that could follow that G. So Bach provides, and so from what he says, you can determine, I said this when I covered this, you can determine that the only example that's missing there in D is the example of a fallende Sekunde, or a descending second. So in the first one you see the trill is on the G and the next note after is an A. So that's a steigende Sekunde, or an ascending second. The G is going to the A. That's the first example where that Bach shows. The next one, you can see the trill is on the G and then it leaps up to a B. So it's an ascending leap. that Bach shows. And then the next one is that there's the trill on the G, and it leaps down to the E. So that's a descending leap that Bach shows. So what's left is the fallende Sekunde that he says is missing. He says, das bloß eine fallende Sekunde diesem Nachschlag am meisten zuwider ist. So this the Nachschlag mostly does not like the descending second, the fallende Sekunde, i.e. that is not present in this example. So if I was to ask you, what note would the fallende Sekunde be if Bach was to write in the example with a fallende Sekunde, what note would that be if the trill is on the G? And you might answer that note would be an F. And I would say, yeah, that would be my answer too, an F. So, and if you look at, let's say, figure 45, where he introduced the Prahl trill and then wrote out its execution. From what is established there of how Bach understands what a fallende Sekunde is, you can see that Prahl trill on the over the F comes in over the fallende Sekunde, or the descending second. And in its execution, you can see that that principal note is the last note written out with a dot in front of it. And you can see that that principal note is tied to the last note of the Prahl trill, meaning that principal note is not played anymore, but it stays lying without striking it. And that the Prahl trill, and that last note is a fallende Sekunde, and that Prahl trill came in before the fallende Sekunde. So one can gather from that there is no discrepancy or inconsistency in the text or in the words or how Bach presents what he says. So when Baron writers say, in reality, the fallende Sekunde is the first note, and that the Prahl trill is on the second note, so one should scribble out the word for in Bach's paragraph and write in the word noch and understand it as that. You can see they haven't, they don't know what they're talking about. And then in the second half of the sentence, so the sentence is, dieser Prahl Triller kann nicht anders als vor einer fallenden Sekunde vorkommen. Sie mag nun durch einen Vorschlag oder eine große Note entstehen. Now here in that sentence, the C bit, that C is referring to, like, that's translated as it in English. They don't have the masculine feminine thing. But that C is referring to the fallende Sekunde, or the descending second or the falling second. Because if Bach had been referring to the Prahl trill, he would be writing because the Prahl trill is masculine. So he would have been writing mag nun durch einen Vorschlag. So he's referring to the fallende Sekunde when he says, Sie mag nun durch einen Vorschlag oder eine große Note entstehen. So he's saying the fallende Sekunde can be created via an appoggiatura or a main note, a big note. Or it can be due to an appoggiatura or a main note. And there you can see in example A of figure 47 the F is the fallende seconda. And what made it a fallende seconda? It was the G before it. So it was via this G before it. The fallende seconda was created. Because an F on its own is just an F. It's neither a descending second or an ascending second. So it's the note before it that creates that through which it becomes a fallende seconda, a descending second. So that G, it's via the G that this fallende seconda is created. And so that G is a big note, just like what Bach says. And then in the next part of figure 47a, the note that creates the fallende seconda is a G, and that G is an appoggiatura. So the fallende seconda, which is the F, is created by the appoggiatura before it. So it's exactly in keeping with what Bach says. There is no discrepancy between, there is no inconsistency, no nothing. Whereas, if Bärenreiter had have read to the end of the sentence, if what they claim is reality, and that the fallende seconda is the first note, well then, it would mean the fallende seconda is the main note. The fallende seconda would be, in the first one, would be the G, would be the big note, the main note G. That would be the fallende seconda. It wouldn't be created by itself. It would be that. And in the case of the second example, the fallende seconda would be an appoggiatura. It wouldn't be due to the appoggiatura that the fallende seconda is created or exists. The fallende seconda would be the appoggiatura. So if Bach had meant that the first note is the fallende seconda, he would have said that it can only occur before or after, like Bärenreiter say, you should scribble out 4 and write in knock. So it can only come after a fallende seconda, whether that is a main note or an appoggiatura. That is what Bach would be saying if he meant that. He wouldn't say created by a main note or an appoggiatura. He'd say whether that is a main note or appoggiatura. Because if he meant a fallende seconda like Bärenreiter say he should mean it, well then he'd say whether it is a main note or an appoggiatura. So you don't even get to the end of the sentence without it contradicting what Bärenreiter are saying. So what you're seeing is a lack of basic reading comprehension skills. And, you know, they're German speakers. I'm not. So on that level, you can see there, what does Bach mean by a fallende seconda? We've seen that, what he means. We know what Bach means when he... So we would say, we would know that the F is the fallende seconda. And then we can see in the second half of the sentence that he couldn't possibly mean the first note to be the fallende seconda, because if he did, he'd say the fallende seconda is a big note or is an appoggiatura, and not that the fallende seconda would be created via a big note or via an appoggiatura, because it's only in Bach's understanding of what a fallende seconda is, namely the second note, that is created either by the main note, the G, or the appoggiatura G in the next one. That creates the fallende seconda. If the note before it had been an E, that F would have been a steigende seconda, or an ascending second. And that steigende Sekunde would have been created by that E big note before it. And if that E was an appoggiatura before it, it would make that F and a steigende Sekunde, so an ascending second, created by the appoggiatura before it, which would be an E. So they didn't bother to read, or they weren't able to understand this entire sentence. And so we have to look at now, because this is where Lilliput has brought it, we have to see, well, maybe Bach doesn't understand the concept of before and after. Maybe he is not able to use those words properly. And that he has it backwards. That, first of all, I'll say, there's the example. There's one example so far. There were two notes to choose from. The correct answer was the second note. Which note is the following Sekunde? The correct answer is the second note. What did Lilliput do? They got it 180 degrees wrong. They said the first note is the following Sekunde. Out of a choice of two, they got it 180 degrees wrong. And that's amazing. Like, I mean, these are your experts. These are the people who you agree to them, to them being your betters, being your superiors, knowing more than you. You are looking for them for guidance, so in the hope that one day you can be as good as they are. And this is, and they corrected Bach's work, but you could think of it in the other way around. You could think as Bach being the test master. And Bach hands your champion a test. But instead of questions being on the test, there's only answers. There's only the correct answers on the test. And they have to take that test, and you're rooting for your champion and you're hoping they do well. They get a list of the correct answers and they're sitting there and they're looking. And then, let's say the time, it's nearly up. And then, right before they have to hand it up, they scribble out the word for and write in knock and hand it up. And you're going, they were so close. They nearly got it. And then and afterwards, it doesn't matter. There'll be people saying, oh, well done, you were so close. And others, and they're saying, yeah, I know. I don't know what happened there. But that's what they did. They got the right answer, they scribbled it out and wrote in the wrong answer and handed it up. And they think they're the ones correcting Bach in a position where they're above Bach. So they got it 180 degrees wrong. And so what needs to be examined, because this is the level they have brought it to, we have to see, does Bach understand the concept of before and after? Because maybe he doesn't have a clue, because Bärenreiter seems to think he doesn't have a clue. He doesn't know what before and after means, because they knew, and they didn't think, hold on, Bach is a genius. Maybe we're wrong. It's not possible that Bach could be such a genius, come from a family of the greatest musical minds in Western culture, and not know and get that wrong. How could that be? No, they think they stand above Bach. It's typical Lilliput behavior. It's typical, this is the cage. So we have to see, does Bach understand the concept of before and after? And so we can look at paragraph 25. And so Bach is talking about the trill from below. And he says when one encounters it. And he says, and this is in connection with figure 36. He says in 36C that the trill from below will occur after a leap. So nach einem Sprung. sprungen. After a leap. So, does Bach understand the concept of after, of nach? Is he in a position to use that word correctly? So if you look at C, you can see the first note of the top voice is a C. And then there's a leap up to a G. And on that, over that G is the sign for a trill from below. So there's the C, a leap, and the trill from below. So did that trill from below come before or after the leap? And you will answer, it came after the leap. So that means we can say to Bach, well done, you can be proud of yourself, you got it right. Because Bach said it came after a leap too, so he got it right too. Yay, we're all great. And then if you look at the second part of figure 36C, Bach says, again, the trill from below can come after a leap. So he shows the first note is a G on the upper voice, and then it leaps down to a B flat. And on that B flat is the trill from below. So there's the G, a leap, and the trill from below. So what's the answer? It came after a leap. So Bach got it right. He said as well it came after a leap, and you can see there it did. So far he understands the concept of after. And then he says, so it can come after a leap and before an ascending or descending continuation. So nach einem Sprunge vor einer hinauf und heruntergehenden Folge an. So if you look at that first example, you can see the note that follows. What is the ascending continuation of that first example? And then you can see it's the A. It's the A following the G with the trill from below on it. That's the ascending continuation. And so did the ascending so did the trill from below occur before the ascending continuation? And you can see, yes, it did. And so did Bach get it right? He said it comes before an ascending continuation. And lo and behold, he got it right. Because in the example, the trill from below did in fact occur before the ascending continuation. And then in the next example, you can see there's a descending continuation. So the B flat with the trill from below on it goes to an A. So it continues descending, it goes down. And so did that descending continuation, did the trill from below occur before the descending continuation? And so if you look at it, you can see there's the B flat with the trill from below, and then afterwards comes the A, the descending continuation. So yes, it did come, the trill from below did come before the descending continuation. So it shows Bach, you know, there were 4 instances where Bach could have gotten it wrong, and he didn't. He got them all right. And so what Bärenreiter don't say, I mean, what are we meant to take from what they say? Are we meant to change all 4 and nach? Reverse them all in the book? Or just that one? Like, I mean, if you take that first example in paragraph 25, Bach says, also kommt, dieser Triller zwar überhaupt bei langen Noten, besonders aber am meisten vor Fermaten und Schlüssen vor. So he says, the trill from below occurs generally with long notes, but particularly, most of all, before Fermaten and endings. So if Bärenreiter are right, and when Bach says 4, he means nach, does that mean we're meant to read nach? So we are meant to understand it, that the trill from below comes particularly, mostly, after fermatas and after endings. Is that what we're meant to conclude from that, from what they say? So is that the performance practice? Like, you know, don't be looking here for the cutting edge or the expert insight into authentic. You know, maybe it should be Netherlands. What are they doing? How are they honouring their genius insight into how it should be played after an ending? Are they saying that Bach, let's say Bach was performing a piece on the harpsichord, and then he plays the ending and it's over, and then the applause starts and he takes his bow and he goes off stage, and maybe they keep clapping and he comes out, takes some more bows and all, goes off stage, and eventually the clapping stops. And then when it's nice and quiet again, when everybody will hear it, he sneaks out and he plays the trill from below and sneaks off again. Is that how the trill from below is performed after an ending? I can't answer that. You're going to have to ask Bärenreiter to explain that one. So, and then Bärenreiter, they cite instances to support, you know, what they say about Bach being wrong, about him getting the fallende seconda wrong, where it's not it's the fallende seconda is the first note, not the second note, and that you should be, and that Bach got, you know, Bach doesn't have a conception of before and after, because when Bach says before, you should ignore that and read nach, and know better, like they do. Like they know better than Bach, you should know better than Bach too, and read after. So they cite paragraph 14 in the chapter on mordents. And in paragraph 14, Bach says, Bei dieser Gelegenheit kann man anmerken, dass der Mordent und der Pralltriller zwei entgegengesetzte Manieren sind. Der letzte kann nur auf eine Art, nämlich bei einer fallenden Sekunde angebracht werden, wo gar niemals ein Morden statt hat. So, he says the Pralltrill, the latter, he's talking about the Pralltrill, can only be introduced with a fallende Sekunde. And if you look at that example, that's example 78, you can see the G is a fallende Sekunde because the A flat before it makes it a fallende Sekunde. So, did the Pralltrill occur with the fallende Sekunde or the descending second? And there you can see the descending second, the G, and over it is the sign for the Pralltrill. So yes, it did occur with the descending second. So, nothing wrong. There's no inconsistency there. Bärenreiter are citing this to support their argument that he got it wrong. And then Bach says, Das Einzige haben sie miteinander gemein, dass sie beiderseits in die Sekunde hineinschleifen. Der Mordent im Hinaufsteigen und der Pralltriller im Heruntergehen. So he says, the only thing they have in common is that they both slide into or glide into the second. And he means the two, each the respective seconds. In the case of the Mordent is the steigende Sekunde, the ascending second, and in the case of the Pralltrill, it's the descending second. So they both, so the Pralltrill slides into the fallende Sekunde, the descending second. Dass sie beiderseits in die Sekunde hineinschleifen. So he's talking about the fallende Sekunde that he mentioned in the sentence before that. So if you look at that, so if you consider the example 45, where he writes out the execution, you can see that the prol trill is played, that the main note, the F, is that last note, that dotted last note, which is tied to the last note of the prol trill. And you can see that that prol trill, and that F is the following secunda, and you can see that that prol trill slides into the following secunda, because the following secunda comes at the end. It's that note to which the last note of the prol trill is tied. So it slides into the following secunda. If what Bear and Reiter maintain is the reality, well then it would mean that the secunda Bach is talking about is the A flat. And how can the prol trill slide into something that came before it? It's impossible. It is. If we want to talk about in reality or in truth, the truth of that is, the reality of that is it's impossible that the prol trill on the G can slide into the preceding A flat. You'd have to go back in time. You'd have to go in reverse. But then if you went in reverse, it's not sliding into a fallende secunda, it's sliding into an steigende secunda. It is impossible. And there again, you can see that Bear and Reiter lack basic reading comprehension, the ability to just understand what they're reading, or they didn't even bother. It's bizarre. And you could see this probably rather is like another case of that, what I said about addition shot. They're just picking examples like a kid in school. You need to get the job done. You need quotes to sound good. And so they just look up wherever prol trill is mentioned and adds that in, because it is to fool you, and you are gullible. In their eyes, you're worth nothing. You're worthless, because they know how bad they are, and you're even worse than them. So it's just, and they know you'll never look at those examples. You'll just believe that they are an authority and that you should believe them because they know what they're talking about. Look, they quoted pages and paragraph numbers after all. So they didn't look at that and think, hold on a second. He says it has to slide into that the prol trill slides into the second. But if the followende secunda is in the A flat, it's impossible that the prol trill can slide into the second. And then he says, the mordent slides into the second, ascending. The prol trill slides into the second while in a descending direction. And the mordent slides into the second in an ascending direction. And so the mordent in that example is over in E flat. And that E flat is a steigende secunda, or an ascending second, or a climbing second. And what makes it a steigende secunda, or an ascending second? It's the D that comes before it. And if you imagine the mordent written out just in your head, and it'll be written out the same way, the mordent will be the note, and the note below and the note itself. And the last note of the mordent will be tied to the principal note, which is that E flat. And so you can see the mordent is sliding into the second. And what creates that steigende second? It's the D before it. And so Bear and Reiter should understand the D as the steigende secunda. And how can the mordent possibly slide into a note that has come before it? That is, in reality, in Wahrheit, impossible. And you are meant to, you're following Bach. You are you see, your Bach is your guide, and he can take you to the promised land. He can take you to the top. And he says, come this way. And Bärenreiter come along and say, he meant go that way. And they point in completely the wrong direction. And how many people are going to follow Bärenreiter? And how many people will see the Bärenreiter thing, ignore Bach? Because I don't get this. Lilliput always looks for Lilliput. When they have greats to follow, but yet they ignore the greats and follow Lilliput. So they'll read that. The Lilliput person will read that introduction, feel very intelligent that they're reading the introduction too, because you generally skip those things, and they'll love that. They'll love that because it makes them feel superior to Bach. And then they'll have read that, and if they encounter anybody else trying to work their way through the book, they'll say, oh, in paragraph 34, read knock instead of 4, because Bach got it wrong. It should say before, or it should say after, not Bach. Bach just didn't, God love him, he tried, but he's just not as clever as we are. And that's what will happen. And they'll be having everybody go the wrong way. And what ends up happening is only a few will actually get to that promised land. Everybody else will be detoured because there was some tiny Lilliput person telling them, go that way. And these are people, this is a collection, they say we. This is a group of people who got together and decided that for a publication. My stuff is for a YouTube video. Theirs is for, something official. And they have a reputation. You can see what the owner of Bärenreiter, the standard he is. For as bad as the people he hires are, he is the prime example of the biggest turkey of them all. So again, they lack the reading comprehension. They cite that, even though that embarrasses them completely. It shows them up just how inept they are, how unintelligent they are, how little insight they are. And these are German speakers. They should have an advantage over me. And that was the second case where Lilliput gets it 180 degrees wrong. They had two notes to choose from. They chose the wrong note. That's 50% wrong. That's exactly the opposite. If there's one right answer and one wrong answer, the wrong answer is the exact opposite of the right answer. 180 degrees. So that was the first. They chose the wrong note. The second thing they got 180 degrees wrong was Bach says before, and the opposite of before is after. Lilliput would have just had to accept what Bach says, but no, they get it 180 degrees wrong. They turn that 4 into a knock and get that exactly wrong. And they don't stop. You know what the difference between them and me is? On my list, like in order, I place the possibility of me getting it wrong higher than the possibility of Bach getting it wrong. So I consider it more likely that I am wrong than Bach is wrong. So if there's anything that doesn't quite add up, I continue to figure it out till it all makes sense, till the jigsaw pieces fit, because I rule out the idea that I could be wrong before Bach is wrong, or that Bach could be wrong before I'm wrong. Whereas they don't. They see something they don't understand and they immediately assume Bach is the one who's wrong. So they place the possibility of Bach being wrong above the possibility that they're wrong. that way, that's where that first sentence could come from, where they are so condescending and feel they're, you know, above Bach, that they can say, tell Bach, oh, you can be proud because your text was almost practically free from mistakes. And then Bach can say, says who? And they'll say, says us. And Bach will say, well, let's see if you're in a position to determine that. But why do they say that? Because they see it, they place the chances that Bach is wrong as being more, they consider that more likely than they're wrong. That's why they can say, oh, Bach, you can be proud of yourself. That's why they can stand above it and be so condescending to say, oh yeah, we can correct it. And Bach won't believe that. He'll know that they're complete morons, but you'll believe it. And that's who it's meant to work on. You are meant to think they know what they're talking about, that they have at all a clue. But again, this is a camera. I get no reaction from the camera. But is it not abysmal, the level they're operating at? I mean, it didn't even get to the end of the sentence before what they said was contradicted. And had they read to the end of the sentence in paragraph 34, they would have seen it. So, and then they present two examples in the chapter on the turn or the Doppelschlag. And so Bach says, dieser prallende Doppelschlag findet sich ohne und nach einem Vorschlage. Niemals aber kann anders vorkommen als der Pralltriller, nämlich nach einer fallenden Sekunde, von welcher gleichsam abgezogen wird. So, here's something. Here, I'll cut them some slack. And I'll say, yes, that does look like a contradiction. Because Bach says it comes after. That it can't, that the prallende Doppelschlag can't otherwise occur like the Pralltrill, namely after a descending second. And I would say that can look like it's wrong. And then again, in page 96, paragraph 34, they cite that. And then it says, denn indem der prallende Doppelschlag allein nach einer fallenden Sekunde und anders nicht gebraucht werden kann, wobei alle Zeit eine Schleife ist. So there's the other thing where they say the prallende Doppelschlag, der prallende Doppelschlag can only come after a fallenden Sekunde. So there's a contradiction. So what we have is the thing itself with everything that coincides, you know, the paragraph 34, which Bärenreiter address, everything that coincides that keeps that inconsistency. One of the examples that Bärenreiter say is still consistent with paragraph 34. And what we have is another two examples where in the second one he doesn't mention the Pralltrill anymore, and the other one where yes, it looks like it's a contradiction, but you will not find anything, just like that last example came after. That last example, you know, where he talks about it's the Pralltrill sliding into the second, the fallende Sekunde. That came afterwards. And I have shown Bach's understanding of what the fallende Sekunde is. They do not present any evidence to establish what the fallende Sekunde is. And you will not find evidence in this book that establishes the fallende Sekunde as occurring there where Bärenreiter says it occurs, like on the first note. So, which is the weaker? Which is the version more likely to be incorrect? If there was two versions to pick, which one is likely incorrect, if it is at all incorrect? And I'm not going to go into the detail about those two. I'll go into the detail then when I get to them, when I do the chapter on the Doppelschlag, because perhaps, maybe Bach wasn't wrong. I'm not saying he wasn't wrong, but I consider it more likely that I get it wrong, that it's something that I don't understand or something that I haven't seen that stops me thinking he's right, than it with Bach actually not being right. And it's only when I've exhausted that option, like thoroughly exhausted, will I go to the option that Bach was perhaps wrong. But maybe I do see how he can be right. And that, surprise, surprise, it's down to Bärenreiter's complete lack of insight. Complete, in the cage nothing exists. You can see that when I say the world of music, reality, their reality in the cage is not the reality of the world of music. They live in a place where they can make up their reality, and that's why they can come out with such garbage. I will address that, but there is more supporting evidence. They are stronger examples to support the conclusion that paragraph 34 is correct. And that other, and the one as well is correct. And on page 102 in the chapter on mordants, paragraph 14, that as well is correct, consistent with it. Bärenreiter should never have cited that in support of their argument. But if one had to say one of those is wrong, if there's no other choice, the correct answer would be saying the knock is wrong, if anything. Because the knock doesn't, it has less supporting evidence. So they had two things to choose from, and they, again, 180 degrees wrong. They corrected the correct version. And they changed it, they corrected so it coincides with, if the other one is, let's say, hypothetically incorrect, well then they corrected the correct one so it matches the incorrect one. So when I say Lilliput get it 180 degrees wrong, I'm not making that up. That is what they're doing. So I'll just read that once more just to end it off. Just so you can hear again your best, your superiors, your experts, the people you are looking to for answers, for guidance, for the expertise. Here's what they say. Bach konnte mit Recht stolz darauf sein, dass sowohl der Text als auch die Noten in seinen beiden Versuchen nahezu fehlerfrei waren. Lediglich eine Stelle ist uns aufgefallen, die inhaltlich problematisch ist. Den Prall-Triller lokalisiert Bach zunächst vor einer fallenden Sekunde. In Wahrheit sitzt er aber auf der zweiten Note, mithin nach einer fallenden Sekunde. Deshalb sollte man auch an der ersten Stelle nachlesen. And this is Bach's sentence. Dieser Prall-Triller kann nicht anders als vor einer fallenden Sekunde vorkommen. Sie mag nun durch einen Vorschlag oder eine große Note entstehen. Figur 47. So the fallende Sekunde will arise via a Vorschlag or a big note. And so, for your interpretation, you can, in pieces, you'll see this trill sign and you'll be wondering, is this a pral trill or not? So you can see, you know, is it over a descending second? And then you can think that might be a pral trill. And what Bach is doing here, you know, Bach is in the world of music. He's not like them, like Bärenreiter in the cage, where they can make up reality as they go along, where reality doesn't exist and all you have is notes without consequence. So you can say what you like. You can do what you like. It doesn't matter because all you're doing is playing notes. It's irrelevant what you do in the cage because none of it is music. So what Bach he's saying, he's talking about the world of music and he's talking about the laws of nature. And these are not, you know, you don't get to choose them. You don't get to pick what you prefer. So he is saying, not only is he saying where it occurs in the piece, he is as well saying where it's possible. And the only way you are going to be able to perform or execute a pral trill is when it, you know, comes before a fallende secunda, a descending second, exactly as he has it there. If you try and introduce it anywhere else, it's not going to work. You're not going to get a pral trill. And these are laws of nature. It's just like, you know, in terms of farming or gardening or whatever, there's certain laws that they know through observation of nature, like when not to plant, like when to plant crops and don't plant them too early, because, you know, what they'll do is through the generations, they'll observe what happens. They'll see if they plant it too early, there'll be frost at night, the crops will die. And it's no use that you have to wait till the frost stops before you start planting them. So it's not the law that you, like, let's say you only start planting something in May, is not a law because that's the way they prefer it. It's a law because it's the law of nature. This is the way it works. And it's nobody's choosing. It's just understanding, observing, seeing what happens and adjusting so you start to move in harmony with the laws of nature. And that will produce the best results. And that is what Bach is talking about here. He is helping you not only interpret, but as well play and perform. And he's not going to, you will not end up trying to have a pral trill somewhere where it doesn't belong and spend the rest of your life trying to work the impossible. Like, you know, you can follow Bärenreiter, what they say, and try and get the pral trill to slide into the note that came before it. Good luck with that. You will never achieve that. It is impossible. But not in the mind. Not in the mind of Bärenreiter. Because let's say I credit them with a basic level of intelligence. That means I have to credit them with having read the sentence they quoted, like they included as support for their conclusion. That means they've read it, they've considered it, and that means they are in no doubt that one can actually slide into the second, even though the second came before the pral trill. And you will know that I'm being absurd if I credit them with that. You will know from this, having watched this, that it would be ridiculous to think they read it. It would be ridiculous to think they understood it. It would be ridiculous to think they thought about it. And it would be ridiculous to think the conclusion they all came up with. All these experts, they all put their heads together and they probably had a meeting and they came up with that. It would be ridiculous to think any of those things about it. Okay, I'll leave it there for now and I'll continue on in the next video. Thanks. Bye.